The townsfolk laughed when Winston Caldwell hauled the muddy wreckage into his barn. Another junk project, they sneered. But when his arthritic fingers brushed a hidden panel, the ship didn't just hum, it recognized his DNA. That's when the hologram appeared, addressing him by a name no one knew. Welcome, architect. Now the 73-year-old mechanic faces an impossible truth. This isn't salvage. It's a message from the future, and the sender shares his last name. Winston Caldwell's hands told the story of 46 years resurrecting broken machines. His calloused fingers could diagnose a failing circuit by touch alone, detecting heat variations most would miss with instruments. The forest clearing after the storm revealed a teardrop-shaped anomaly half buried in mud, its curves too precise for earthly wreckage. Neighbors chuckled when he winched it home, another of old Caldwell's doomed projects. They didn't notice the alloy refused to oxidize, or how the surface showed no weld marks despite its seamless construction. Winston ran his palms across the hull each morning, removing debris with the same meticulous care he'd used restoring a 1957 Stratocaster that still played in the county bluegrass band. This wasn't junk. It wasn't even damaged. Just waiting. Mechanics developed tactile intuition beyond visual inspection, muscle memory mapping thermal variance, texture shifts, and resonant frequencies into diagnostic data. Winston's thumbs registered minute depressions near what might be a hatch. On the 9th day of cleaning, his thumb found an indentation that defied aircraft design standards. The click resonated through his bones before sound reached his ears. A hum followed, rising from subsonic to audible range like a turbine spinning up after decades dormant. Neighbors would later swear they saw blue light bleeding through the barn's weatherboarding that afternoon. Inside, Winston stood frozen as panels illuminated under his touch. The ship didn't just respond, it calibrated. Control surfaces adjusted thickness to accommodate his arthritis, display brightness dimmed for his aging eyes. Every interaction suggested the wreck hadn't been discarded but placed. His workshop tools lay where he'd dropped them mid-repair. A tractor ignition coil half rewound, a vacuum tube radio awaiting new capacitors. These were things he fixed. The ship was something else. It fixed itself in response to him. That evening he ate supper with grease still under his nails from the afternoon's discoveries. The local paper lay open to a classified section circled in pen. Government surplus auctions, always worth checking for quality hardware. It was the only outward sign anything unusual had occurred. By nightfall, he'd returned to the barn with better lighting. Measurements confirmed the hull's impossible properties, lighter than aluminum but shrugging off hammer strikes like tungsten. His micrometer couldn't reconcile the thickness readings with the visible edge profile. A bank of dials glowed to life when he leaned against what might be a console. Needles swung without apparent power source. One gauge's symbols resembled Sanskrit merged with circuit diagrams. Oddest of all, he understood some. Chilton manuals and military repair guides lined his office shelves, but nothing explained why the ship's interior matched the dimensions of his own hands. Control yokes spaced for his reach, pedals positioned for his stance. Like a flight suit tailored before measurement, the hologram appeared when his palm brushed a hexagonal plate near the cockpit. It addressed him by a name no one had called him since his classified engineering days in '72. Authorization protocols he'd helped design flickered in the display. The system wasn't just recognizing him, it expected him. By dawn, he'd found the footlocker beneath his bed. Its contents raised more questions than answers. Tools from his defense contractor days thrummed awake, their interfaces matching the ship's odd ports exactly. Whoever sent this craft knew what he'd need to operate it. The diagnostic wand's display projected schematics in corrupted fragments. Enough to confirm two impossibilities. First, the drive core's specifications defied known physics. Second, its damage pattern suggested catastrophic failure during something that couldn't be described as flight. Morning found Winston tracing symbols in the dust of his workbench. He recognized the shapes from his own half-forgotten notebooks, concepts too radical even for black projects. The ship's interior bore his design philosophy down to the placement of emergency cutoffs. Tools that shouldn't align with any existing technology fit perfectly into access panels. Procedures he'd never trained for unfolded with muscle memory he didn't possess. Every revelation pointed to one conclusion. This machine hadn't crashed. It had arrived. Dust motes swirled as Winston's crowbar broke the seal on the military footlocker beneath his bed. The airtight container exhaled 43 years of confinement, a mix of cordite, machine oil, and that particular polymer scent all classified hardware seemed to share. His contractor badge still gleamed under a layer of neglect, its security clearance level blacked out with permanent marker. The multispectral diagnostic wand hummed awake in his palm before he'd finished wiping off the dust. Its power cell shouldn't have held charge after decades, yet the interface ports glowed the same soft blue as the ship's control panels. Defense projects often misplaced prototype tools. A delivery driver once confessed his truck always carried 2 extra inventory sheets for accidental allocations. Recovered documents would later show 3 separate Cold War incidents where engineers kept functional black tech until retirement. This device was different. Its cylindrical body warmed to his touch, surface dimples aligning perfectly with his finger placement like the ship's controls. No training manuals existed for tools designed decades ahead of their time. Temporal mechanics research suggested some technologies resist obsolescence through recursive engineering, future versions influencing their own creation. The wand's display activated when pointed at the ship's hull, projecting symbols that shifted between binary and something akin to cuneiform before stabilizing. Winston recognized 3 characters immediately. Section markers from his abandoned hyperspace theory notes, scribbled after too many whiskeys in '81. Nobody had seen those diagrams except his bulldog, and Captain never talked. The wand chirped as it synced with the ship's damaged systems, translating warnings about containment integrity. One phrase appeared repeatedly: chronostatic buffer. Rust flaked from the locker's hinges as he dug deeper. Beneath outdated manuals lay a Faraday pouch containing something that shouldn't exist, a neural interface headset from Project Looking Glass. He'd signed non-disclosure agreements in triplicate after that demonstration. The electrodes hissed as they adhered to his temples without gel, pulling schematics directly into his visual cortex. Each circuit path triggered muscle memory his hands didn't possess, guiding them toward maintenance points the ship didn't visibly have. A documented phenomenon occurs when engineers interact with sufficiently advanced technology. Competence without comprehension. The headset projected repair procedures for systems using physics terms not yet coined. 5 warning glyphs burned themselves into Winston's retinas, corresponding to the ship's failing temporal anchor. Only later would he realize the schematics included his own fingerprints as part of the calibration routine. The locker's final layer contained 3 shock-proof cases. Inside rested tools that looked ordinary until activated: a torque wrench displaying angles in base 12, a soldering iron emitting plasma at 7,000 K without heat dispersion. Most telling, a frequency analyzer tuned to detect chronoton particles. Their casings bore procurement codes from a military base that wouldn't be constructed until 2029. When the diagnostic wand projected its findings onto the barn wall, equations scrolled too fast for conscious reading. Yet Winston's hands moved independently, tracing connections between symbols that hadn't been invented when he retired. Each tool in the locker complemented a specific ship system, like pieces crafted for a lock before the key exists. The headset fed him emergency protocols for temporal realignment, though its warnings about causal recursion meant nothing until the hologram reactivated. The ship's AI addressed him by a project codename from his black budget days, one so compartmentalized he'd nearly forgotten it himself. Authorization sequences matched his retinal patterns despite never being scanned. Every security challenge used personal memories for verification: his sister's birthday, the registration number of his first motorcycle, the street where he'd grown up. Dawn light revealed the most disturbing correlation. The ship's schematics mirrored his old notebook sketches, the impractical designs colleagues had laughed out of meetings. Only these versions had refinement suggesting decades of development. His locker tools fit the ship's access ports like custom machined parts, their functions aligning with damage reports from systems that theoretically couldn't fail yet. By noon, he'd confirmed the impossible. The wand's last diagnostic revealed why these specific tools existed in his possession. Their quantum signatures bore manufacturing dates spread across the next 70 years. The headset's knowledge base included equations he wouldn't derive until age 89, according to its user logs. This wasn't just future technology. It was his future technology. The ship's status display flickered awake with warnings written in a typeface that hadn't been invented yet. Power levels at 18%, life support offline, critical navigation failure, standard crash damage until the final line pulsed red, temporal alignment drive compromised. Winston's fingers froze mid-diagnostic. Military training recognized certain patterns. The counter flashing below the warning wasn't measuring seconds. Too irregular, sometimes pausing for 3 beats, sometimes 19. Aviation black boxes preserved data for about 25 hours. This memory core showed 63% integrity despite logs referencing 62 years subjective operation time. The discrepancy suggested more than mechanical failure. Theoretical physicists compare temporal alignment to GPS calibration for time travelers. Without it, jumps become uncontrolled ricochets through history. Winston's diagnostic wand translated schematics showing 6 concentric rings of exotic matter around the cockpit, a containment system for something far beyond propulsion. Each ring bore stress fractures radiating from a central breach point, not crash damage. Rift formation. Active components emitted steady gamma radiation at precisely 1.21 gigawatts, a figure that tickled some deep memory. Cables snaking through the bulkheads weren't wiring. They resembled twisted strands of chronoton particles frozen mid-oscillation. Winston traced one to its source, a spherical chamber humming at frequencies that made his fillings ache. Modern aircraft record about 2,000 flight parameters. This system logged over 70,000 metrics, mostly quantum state variables. One readout stuck out. Local causality index showed massive deviations. Another displayed a real-time graph of paradox probability. Both spiked sharply at the same timestamp in the logs. Power outlets blinked with bioluminescent patterns instead of LEDs. They brightened when he neared, anticipating his intent like the ship knew where he'd reach next. A maintenance panel hissed open under his gaze rather than his tools. Inside, crystalline circuits pulsed with fractal complexity, their pathways rearranging as he watched. Every schematic his tools projected showed components existing in multiple states simultaneously. Superposition made physical. The control yoke adjusted its grip to exactly match Winston's arthritic fingers as he touched it. Screens flickered to display star charts, except the constellations were all wrong. Polaris sat 5 degrees off its known position. Betelgeuse showed as a white dwarf instead of a red supergiant. The computer offered navigation options for jump points that shouldn't exist for another 6 centuries. Alarms triggered when his sleeve brushed a darkened console. The holographic projection flickered to life, a star field with jagged red vectors cutting across known space lanes. One path terminated at Earth with a pulsing marker dated 9 months in the future. Another branched into 15 divergent time streams, each labeled with probability percentages. Winston's hands shook as he retrieved his old slide rule. The calculations took 40 minutes. Relative temporal displacement matched certain forgotten Cold War experiments. One's officially scrubbed from records after 3 physicists vanished from a locked lab. The ship's chronoton emissions aligned precisely with the exponential curves in his mothballed notebooks from '78. Data corruption made partial sense of the damage reports. The breach started when temporal anchors failed, whatever those were. Backup systems mentioned something called causal foam, had partially contained the rupture. Winston's multi-tool detected residual chronoton radiation radiating from his own body, higher near his head and hands. The readout suggested prior exposure lasting approximately 53 years. Every diagnostic circled back to one terrifying conclusion. The exotic matter rings weren't decoration. That spherical chamber wasn't a power core. This vessel wasn't designed for moving through space. Its entire architecture screamed a single purpose: manufacturing controlled temporal breaches, navigating folded time like a submarine plunging through oceanic trenches. A final scan broke through corrupted logs. Flight plan coordinates matched a research facility that didn't exist yet. The destination timestamp, June 15, 2142. Last confirmed position put the origin point 9 decades further ahead than that. The math painted the full picture now. This wasn't a crash landing. It was a controlled implosion across time itself. A desperate gambit to reach this specific barn in this exact moment. Every system failure, every damaged component told the same story backwards through causality. Someone or something needed Winston Caldwell precisely as he was. Arthritis, grease-stained coveralls, and all, to complete a circuit that wouldn't be invented for another lifetime. Ranger Patel's government-issue boots crunched across Winston's gravel driveway with the weight of bad news. The county's violation notice flapped in his grip. Standard paperwork about unauthorized structures. 7 days to remove the barn's new addition. Except Winston spotted the watermark invisible to most eyes. A classified annex number bleeding through the cheap copy paper. Someone upstairs had flagged this far above county pay grade. Patel's gaze darted to the barn doors where blue light pulsed between warped wooden slats. "This falls under federal jurisdiction now," he said, voice tight. His posture gave him away. Shoulders stiff like a man reciting scripted lines, fingers tapping Morse code nerves against his thigh. Behind him, a black sedan idled on the road, exhaust curling in the cold morning air. Historical archives show most recovered anomalies get mislabeled. Weather balloons, experimental aircraft, industrial waste. Bureaucrats file them away under mundane categories they're cleared to understand. Declassified memos reveal a pattern. Administrative seizures always precede technological blackouts. A farmer's meteorite becomes military scrap. A student's strange rock sample vanishes into DARPA storage. The system protects itself by not knowing what it destroys. Winston wiped greasy hands on his coveralls, leaving smudges on the notice. "This isn't salvage," he said, watching Patel's eyes flick toward the barn again. "It's restoration." The distinction mattered. One implied randomness, the other suggested purpose. The administrator's shoes shifted on the gravel, polished Oxfords all wrong for rural inspections. His left lapel pin caught the light wrong, flashing what might have been an agency insignia. The standoff played out in millimeters. Patel's jaw clenched when distant humming surged from the barn, a sound no combustion engine made. His grip tightened on the clipboard holding Winston's property survey, the same document that would later show 6 signatures from officials who shouldn't have jurisdiction over private farmland. Government vehicles circled county roads after dusk lately. Neighbors reported men in unmarked vans scanning the terrain with instruments that looked nothing like surveying equipment. Winston noted the sedan's antenna array before its driver leaned out to cough. Too many dishes for a standard-issue vehicle. The dashboard's glow revealed racks of monitoring gear, the kind he'd seen during his contractor days, tuned for exotic energy signatures. They weren't here to enforce zoning laws. They were fishing for proof. Patel's phone buzzed. He checked it too fast, shoulders hiking toward his ears. A coded alert then. Winston had received enough in his time to recognize the tells, the quick breath, the forced blankness sliding over frustration. Orders from above contradicting whatever script he'd been given. When the administrator spoke again, his voice had gone monotone. 7 days, he repeated, but his eyes said he knew the deadline was fiction. The barn's lights pulsed brighter as Patel retreated. Through the cracked door, holographic schematics floated above the ship's hull, repair sequences Winston hadn't activated. He'd seen this dance before during Cold War tech retrievals. First the polite notice, then the armed seizure. Except this time the hardware fought back. Glass shattered upstairs as Winston's old Geiger counter fell off its shelf, needles spiking without cause. Dust rained from the rafters where no foot had stepped. The ship's humming rose to a pitch that vibrated fillings. Some part of it had sensed the threat, or remembered one. Documents would later surface showing the county administrator filed an urgent request for federal backup that same hour. His report described potential hazardous materials requiring specialized disposal. The responding agency's name was redacted, but Winston didn't need to see it. He'd spent the 70s building containment protocols for recovered technology. He knew exactly which silent branch handled assets like this. That evening, Winston ate supper with the radio scanning emergency bands. Distant crackles of encrypted chatter bled through the static. The ship's dim glow reflected in his untouched coffee, a blue shimmer that shouldn't have been visible through 2 closed doors. His tools lay where he'd left them, still humming faintly from contact with systems they weren't designed to service. The footlocker's neural headset projected warnings across the barn wall all night. Probabilities flickered: 83% chance of forced entry, 62% likelihood of non-standard retrieval protocols, 47% possibility of sanitization measures. The math didn't scare him as much as the annotations scrolling alongside. projected outcomes matching classified operation parameters from the Manhattan Project's cleanup crews. The ship wasn't just aware of the threat. It had calculated this scenario before. Winston oiled his shotgun out of habit, though he knew conventional weapons wouldn't factor into whatever came next. The real defenses hummed under faux metal groaned as the ship's surface rippled under Winston's diagnostic wand. What should have been solid alloy flexed like mercury, reshaping itself around the tool's tip. The transformation wasn't random. Panels flowed into an archway exactly matching his stooped posture. Not an approximation, not an adjustment. A precise biometric invitation carved from living metal. The interior defied logic. Control surfaces sat at ergonomic angles familiar to any pilot, but the materials pulsed with organic rhythm. Bulkheads expanded slightly with each hum, like ribs beneath skin. Consoles molded themselves to his fingerprints before contact. NASA's shape memory alloys could return to pre-programmed forms, but this reacted with something closer to sentience. It didn't just accommodate his movements. It anticipated them. Winston's arthritic knuckles brushed a navigation panel. The surface yielded like firm gelatin before firming into perfect support. Displays brightened to compensate for his fading eyesight without being asked. Theoretical physics papers described conscious metals, capable of evolutionary adaptation, but none predicted this level of symbiosis. Every system responded as if it had spent decades learning his habits. A chemical smell flooded the cabin, ozone and something organic like fresh-cut stems. The ship inhaled through unseen vents, cycling air past Winston's face before adjusting humidity to his preference. Environment controls pulled from deep memory, the exact dry warmth of his Arizona service days. The systems weren't guessing. They remembered. His military-issue multi-tool chirped when pointed at the cockpit glass. The readout staggered him. The transparent material wasn't glass at all. Trillions of nanocrystals aligned into light-bending matrices, their atomic structure shifting between states, one moment harder than diamond, the next flowing like liquid to seal stress fractures. Current metallurgy books had no category for this. Winston's boot scuffed the floor plating. The sound rang wrong, not the tinny echo of aircraft aluminum, but something denser. His diagnostic wand detected atomic structures rearranging underfoot, reinforcing where his weight landed most. The ship wasn't just repairing itself. It was optimizing for him specifically down to his gait. Then came the sound. A resonant hum spiking at 27 hertz. The precise frequency his old base's research suggested could stabilize chronoton particles. The vibration rattled his molars in a way that unlocked buried memories. He'd heard this tone during classified experiments in '79, back when they thought they were inventing stealth coatings, not time travel buffers. Blue light erupted from the central console. A hologram resolved molecules first, strands of DNA twisting into a double helix before fleshing out into a human face. The features snap-focusing made Winston's heart stutter. High cheekbones like his sister, his own stubborn chin, hazel eyes that mirrored his right down to the cataract forming in the left. The projection spoke his name with unsettling familiarity. Not Winston, not Mr. Caldwell. The childhood nickname only his mother had used before she died in '65. The one he'd never written down or shared with military psych evaluations. The ship's voice carried the same Ohio lilt as her last phone call. Schematics bloomed in the air between them. His fingerprints marked every critical component, not as user but as designer. Patent numbers he didn't recognize scrolled past, all bearing his signature from dates decades in the future. The biotech interface responded strongest to his left hand's unique tremor, the one even doctors couldn't explain. Deep in the ship's guts, something answered Winston's presence with a cascade of quantum signatures. The diagnostic wand nearly overloaded tracing them, every particle entangled with his own cellular structure. Biological locking mechanisms primed to his specific neuron firing patterns. This wasn't just human technology. It was Caldwell technology. The hologram zoomed in on a rotating double helix superimposed over Winston's torso. Junk DNA segments glowed radioactive green, sequences scientists currently considered genetic dead ends. According to the display, these dormant codes contained the encryption key for the ship's core systems. A biological handshake only his lineage could complete. Metal creaked as the cockpit reshaped itself again. Headrests molded to the precise contour of his cervical spine. Control sticks adjusted resistance to match his grip, strength decay from arthritis, even the airflow vectored away from his sensitive sinuses. The adjustments were too specific, too perfect. Not designed for a species, tailored for a man. When the hologram displayed his entire genome alongside the ship's activation protocols, the final piece clicked. This vessel hadn't been waiting for any human to stumble upon it. The alloy memorized his bone density. The computers mapped his neural pathways. The security systems responded to childhood memories. Every system whispered the same truth. This machine didn't just recognize him. It was built for him down to the atomic level. And somehow, impossibly, he'd built it too. Engineering schematics scrolled past too fast to read, but Winston caught flashes of his own blueprint shorthand, the same lazy curves he'd used since apprentice years. Last week's coffee stain marked a corner of one display, though the document bore a 2142 timestamp. The paradox should have broken his brain. Instead, it felt like coming home. As the hologram dissolved, the ship exhaled through its vents, a contented sigh of systems recognizing their creator. The scent of Arizona desert after rain flooded the cabin. Not simulated, not approximate. The exact mineral tang of the air outside his childhood home. Every revelation pointed toward one inescapable conclusion. This wasn't just a ship from his future. It was his life's work returned to him, completing a loop decades in the making. Winston's hands found the controls without looking. The grips molded around his fingers like reuniting with an old friend. No training could explain his flawless navigation of the interface. No coincidence justified how every system responded to subconscious muscle twitches he himself didn't notice. The truth hummed in the metal around him. He wasn't learning this technology for the first time. He was remembering it. Static hissed through the ship's speakers before resolving into a woman's strained voice. Test flight ATS of the Kronos-class vessel, Harati. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a pilot in a uniform that didn't match any military branch. Her insignia glowed with the same quantum shimmer as the ship's hull. Winston's breath caught at the way she adjusted her headset, the exact quick twist of the wrist his sister used to do with her watch band. The emergency log played in jagged fragments. Coordinates flashed too fast to catch. Longitude and latitude values that placed the ship somewhere over Kansas, but with altitude readings that made no sense. Negative numbers, then 10,000-digit figures. Systems reports scrolled alongside the pilot's voice. Temporal alignment failure, quantum entanglement decay, something called causal drag spiking off the charts. Modern black boxes record cockpit voice data for 25 hours. This log stretched across what the timestamp claimed was 63 years. If found, the woman rasped between bursts of static. Deliver core memory to Dr. Eliza Caldwell. The name hit Winston like a live wire. Not just the shared surname, the way the pilot's vowels rounded on the called exactly like his mother's had. A search algorithm would later show only 17 living Caldwells in the continental U.S., none with that first name. Bootstrap paradox research suggests certain information lacks origin points. The ship's schematics contained fragments of equations Winston had doodled in notebooks for years, crude versions of the very systems failing around him now. The pilot's control inputs matched his habitual gestures too precisely. That three-fingered tap to initiate sequences. The subconscious way he braced his left palm against console edges. Personnel files flashed as the log continued. Service records for something called the Temporal Architect, course and deployment histories mentioning operations with code names that made Winston's hands shake, phrases lifted straight from his classified work. In 72, then the screen locked on an ID photo, same hazel eyes as his sister's high school graduation picture, same slight cant to the head that made family portraits look like variations on a theme. The nameplate read Lotte Eliza Caldwell. Her next words confirmed what the resemblance suggested. Grandpa Winston, static eating half the syllables, if you're hearing this, the primary timeline's compromised. The pilot, his great-granddaughter from 2142, spoke with the exhausted fondness of someone explaining basic mechanics to a child. She detailed emergency protocols in terms referencing inside jokes he didn't yet know, referenced his old bad habit of leaving wrenches inside fuselages, a quirk he thought nobody noticed. The temporal drive's failure modes appeared next. Animated schematics showed catastrophic subliminal collapse, what happened when time travel physics unraveled mid-transit. Winston recognized the visual language. The animation style matched exact specifications from his long-abandoned idea for interactive technical manuals. A younger agent hesitated at the tree line. His gloved hands fumbled with a containment unit, a polished metal box with quantum dampeners Winston had only seen in prototype. The rookie's body language screamed discomfort. Veterans know that look. The moment when operatives realize they're not retrieving equipment. They're erasing history. The ship's AI updated Project Winston's voice boomed through the ship's external speakers, amplified beyond natural human range. Clear the area immediately. The warning vibrated through the bones of every agent on the perimeter, just as the anti-grav emitters whined to life. Not the scream of jet turbines or the roar of rockets, something far stranger. A sound that bypassed the ears to resonate directly in the gut. The AI painted trajectories across Winston's vision. Escape paths avoiding every nearby farmhouse, school, and church steeple. Calculations adjusted in real time for civilian movement patterns. The system accounted for variables no normal navigation computer could predict. A milk truck's route, a child's bicycle path, even the flight patterns of startled geese. No guesswork, just cold geometric certainty about where people would be in the next 90 seconds. Wood splintered as the barn roof tore away. Not from explosive force. The structure simply unraveled at the molecular level where ship met timber. The Harity rose in a column of swirling dust, its hull shedding decades of calculated grime. False rust patches evaporated like morning fog. Dents flowed smooth as living skin. What emerged wasn't just alien technology. It was a truth too polished to hide anymore. Public UFO sightings typically spark debate. Blurry lights, explainable weather, government denials. This was different. Every witness saw the same crisp details. Silver alloy that reflected colors not found in nature. Edges that blurred when you tried to focus on them. Proportions that hurt the brain to study for too long. No ambiguity. No room for conspiracy theories. Just irrefutable physics-defying craft hovering in broad daylight. Historical records show technological revolutions often begin with public demonstrations. The Wright brothers' flight shocked witnesses not because it was impossible, but because it rendered old arguments irrelevant. The Harati's ascent accomplished the same brutal clarity. Chatter erupted on emergency bands as local police scanners overloaded with calls. Cell phone networks jammed as footage spread. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle. It was broadcasting in 4K. Ranger Patel's radio crackled with panicked commands. Orders to stand down. Requests for air support. Confused demands for identification. His face went slack watching the ship hover precisely 2 meters above the tallest pine. Government training doesn't prepare you for moments when reality rewrites itself before your eyes. His hand hovered near his sidearm, not to draw, but to confirm the familiar weight of something still obeying known physics. The ship's underbelly pulsed with slow blue waves. Not lights exactly, more like luminous liquid trapped beneath the surface. Patterns coalesced into symbols mirroring those on Winston's diagnostic tools. Ancient astronaut theorists would later claim they resembled Sumerian cuneiform. Physicists at 3 major universities would publish papers on the possible quantum computational language. Every witness agreed on one detail. The markings felt somehow readable, like a childhood tongue just beyond recall. Anti-gravity isn't supposed to exist. Newton laughs in his grave. Yet the Harati floated without exhaust trails, without heat distortion, without any visible means of propulsion. Just an old man's hands resting on controls that gleamed like surgical instruments. The scene ripped the mask off a century of UFO reports, proof that humanity had been lied to about what was possible. Agents staggered back as soil lifted in perfect concentric rings beneath the ship. Not debris, not chaos, precise geometric shapes forming and dissolving like sand in a vibrating plate. The display matched century-old Tesla research into resonant frequencies, proving someone had solved the puzzle long before mainstream science admitted it was real. Every pebble, every blade of grass danced to the same silent song of manipulated gravity. Then came the data burst. Every electronic device within 3 miles suddenly displayed the same message. Winston's handwritten launch checklist from his footlocker. superimposed over declassified military documents about recovered alien technology, phones, tablets, car navigation systems, even Patel's encrypted government laptop. The truth spread faster than containment protocols could activate. The ship hovered for 7 more seconds, exactly long enough for every witness to process what they were seeing. Long enough for shaky smartphone videos to upload. Long enough to ensure no amount of official debunking could erase the collective memory. Then, without sonic booms or fiery exhaust, it accelerated straight up faster than anything human-made should move. Radar stations would later report the object reaching 80,000 feet in under 3 seconds before vanishing. Satellite telemetry showed no heat signature, no ion trail, just a perfect absence where physics said something should be. The ascent left behind no debris, no evidence, only hundreds of eyewitnesses and a crater of unanswered questions where Winston Caldwell's barn used to stand. Government cleanup crews arrived within the hour. Men in white hazmat suits spread across the property with Geiger counters and evidence bags. They found nothing but ordinary tools and half-finished tractor repairs. No exotic alloys, no residual radiation. Just the quiet hum of cicadas in the summer heat and a single anomaly. Fresh coffee steaming in a mug on the workbench, as if poured moments before. News vans clogged the county road by afternoon. Reporters interviewed shell-shocked neighbors who described lights in the barn for weeks prior. None mentioned the oddest detail, how every witness described the ship's markings differently, yet all agreed they conveyed the same unshakable message. Technology wasn't the secret. Not anymore. The real revelation had been humanity's capacity to ignore what didn't fit authorized reality. Winston's tools remained exactly where he'd left them. Grease-stained wrenches hanging in their designated slots. Calipers aligned by size on the pegboard. The footlocker sat empty beneath his cot, its interior smelling of ozone and fresh-cut metal. Outside, the government tape flapped in the breeze, cordoning off a mystery that was never really about a crashed ship. It was about the old man who knew how to wake it up. Cell towers continued, broadcasting strange interference patterns for 72 hours, brief bursts of encrypted data that mirrored Winston's neural readings during the ascent. Tech analysts would spend years trying to crack the code. Only Dr. Phillips recognized the truth when her lab computers suddenly displayed complete schematics for a temporal alignment drive. The blueprints bore Wade Caldwell's signature in the corner, dated 20 years in the future. Eliza's voice grew urgent. Don't let them sanitize the wreck. She detailed standard containment procedures, how recovery teams would label the ship as hazardous materials, how bureaucrats would bury it in some warehouse. The speech patterns were pure Caldwell, that clipped way of stressing verbs when agitated. The ship's voice resonated through the barn with eerie clarity, not from any speaker but from the air itself. Primary directive: ensure causal continuity. The words hung between rafter beams as blue light projected a family tree in midair. Winston's breath fogged the charged atmosphere as the hologram zoomed in on a single branch. Eliza Caldwell's birth year glowing, 2079. Her credentials scrolled beneath. Lead temporal architect, Kronos project, the very woman who'd designed the failing drive, currently humming under his feet. Temporal mechanics. Research papers at Caltech describe the self-healing universe hypothesis, the idea that certain paradoxes trigger automatic corrections. The AI's explanation suggested something more deliberate. Vessel launched 2142 to stabilize your timeline. The display switched to showing pages from Winston's own notebooks, doodles of concentric rings now identical to the ship's temporal alignment system. There in his shaky handwriting from 1991, theoretical framework for quantum causality anchoring. Standard AI ethics protocols strictly forbid revealing future events. But temporal violations apparently created exceptions. The intelligence spoke without hesitation about events yet to occur, displaying blueprints Winston wouldn't draft until age 89. Documents stamped top secret temporal research bore his signature from years not yet lived. Advanced models suggest time paradoxes form closed loops, information feeding back on itself until stable. The ship's sole purpose was completing the cycle. Tools glowed within the footlocker as the hologram continued. The multispectral scanner's interface now mirrored schematics of the ship's core, a match too precise for coincidence. Evolutionary models apply to technology too. Complex systems often converge toward optimal forms like flowing water finding cracks. These devices showed the opposite, deliberate imperfections matching Winston's unique craftsmanship quirks. The curve of one wrench's grip mirrored his 57. Harley's throttle, an aesthetic choice no engineer would replicate by accident. Quantum causality models don't usually account for sentient participation. Yet the AI emphasized Winston's conscious role. The equations needed him to see them now to invent them later. Like some cosmic version of that children's game where folded drawings become collaborative art. The display zoomed in on a coffee-stained schematic bearing next Thursday's date. Winston's hands shook, recognizing his own margin notes. The same messy shorthand he'd used since Vietnam-era repair manuals. Chronoton readings spiked near the ship's breached drive core. Normal radiation follows predictable decay patterns. These particles pulsed with coded regularity, like Morse in submarine signals. The AI confirmed it. The crystal matrix wasn't just damaged. It was transmitting. Binary strings translated to geographic coordinates matching Dr. Phillips's university. The system was feeding him pieces, not just of technology, but of his own future actions. Partial blueprints rotated overhead. Winston spotted the telltale Caldwell trademarks instantly. Auxiliary power routed through unnecessary redundancies because he'd never trusted single-point systems. Cooling vents sized for desert operations after that 73 incident in Nevada. Even the logo resembled his old contractor badge. This wasn't just influenced by his work. It was his work refined across iterations of time. Ethics logs scrolled alongside engineering specs. Blackout protocols had been overridden using Winston's own biometrics, as if future him had anticipated needing this exact loophole. The documents referenced recursive consent protocols, legal frameworks for when inventors needed to guide their past selves without violating causality laws. One line stuck out. Caldwell Exception Clause 12b. Inherited memory pathways may bypass standard disclosure restrictions. Winston's military chronometer ticked loudly in the charged air. The second hand moved normally, but the AI's chronostasis display showed local temporal drag, time itself bending around the barn. Experimental data suggested consciousness could influence quantum states. Maybe that explained why certain components only activated under his direct gaze. The ship wasn't just responding to his touch. It was responding to his expectation of how technology should behave. Diagnostic warnings flickered between ancestral projections. The ship's memory core contained fragmented glimpses of Winston's future workshop, tools identical to those hanging above his current workbench, but worn from decades of use not yet lived. Theoretical models allow for time imprinting, where objects accumulate history from multiple points along someone's timeline simultaneously. The pieces weren't just communicating across years. They were becoming entangled with his own lifespan. Boots crunched gravel outside, government teams moving into position. The hologram zoomed in on Eliza's service record highlighting Operation Grandfather Paradox. Not some clever code name. A literal description. Final display showed newspaper clippings from 2142. A silver-haired Winston shaking hands with officials at something called the Caldwell Temporal Institute. The headlines blurred as the AI delivered its last revelation. Your discovery sequence must remain uninterrupted. This encounter enables the very breakthroughs that construct me. Dawn light crept through barn slats as the projection faded. The tools in Winston's locker settled into standby mode. Not deactivated, but waiting for the next phase. Standard causality models assume immutable pasts. The ship's existence proved otherwise. Every component was both cause and effect of his life's work. Outside, car doors slammed. Radios cracked with muffled commands. Winston's fingers closed around the diagnostic wand automatically. The first move in a game already won, just not yet played. The AI's final words hummed through the metal at frequencies only his bones could feel. More vibration than sound, like memories surfacing from deep tissue. You don't repair time. You become its mechanic. The ship's hull pulsed once, not with exterior light but with internal luminescence tracing exact pathways his future hands would take across its systems. Blueprints became prophecy, became blueprints again in the pre-dawn quiet. Somewhere beyond the barn doors, men with guns and clipboards prepared to enforce laws of physics that no longer applied. Diesel engines growled as government vehicles formed a perimeter around Winston's property at dawn. Men in unmarked body armor moved with tactical precision, not county workers, but a retrieval team with classified orders. Their radios crackled with encrypted chatter as they took positions behind trees and parked trucks. The lead agent's earpiece glinted in the rising sun, a model Winston recognized from his contractor days. Not standard issue, not even DoD, the kind of hardware only three-letter agencies carried. Winston stood in the barn doorway, gripping the diagnostic wand like a weapon. Its tip glowed with an eerie blue pulse, energy signatures no terrestrial device emitted. The AI's voice whispered through his neural implant, calm and measured. Conventional propulsion at 68% capacity. Escape possible but risky. Outside, a sniper's laser dot danced across his chest before vanishing. They weren't here to arrest him. They were surveying the asset. Historical records show most technological cover-ups follow predictable patterns. Whistleblower testimonies describe unmarked vehicles, agents with blank badges, and sudden bureaucratic roadblocks. Over 60% involve rapid militarized responses when civilians encounter tech that threatens existing power structures. The team outside Winston's barn moved with rehearsed efficiency, checking gear, signaling silently, preparing containment protocols. Their boots left no prints in the damp grass, military-grade stealth soles. The lead agent raised a rectangular device, something between a Geiger counter and a satellite phone. Its antenna array extended with a mechanical whine, scanning the barn's energy signatures. Winston's multi-tool vibrated in his pocket, detecting the sweep. The readout showed frequencies normally reserved for tracking nuclear materials. These weren't local law enforcement. They were a cleanup crew for something much darker. Inside the barn, the ship's hull emitted a subsonic thrum. Metal panels rippled like disturbed water, reshaping themselves along unseen fault lines. The AI projected tactical data across Winston's retina. Heat signatures of 12 hostiles, 4 armored vehicles, 1 airborne unit circling at 5,000 feet. The display included weapon loadouts and probable breach points. Information no civilian should access. Intel far beyond current military capabilities. Radio static burst from the perimeter. This is Delta Leader to all units. Containment protocol Zulu 9 is active. The code phrase matched Pentagon protocols Winston had helped draft in '78 for recovering downed experimental aircraft. Except Zulu 9 wasn't for crashes. It was for sanitizing incidents involving foreign tech. The ship's database confirmed. Records showed identical protocols used at Roswell and 13 other black sites. 3 holographic pathways shimmered in the cockpit air, solid enough to cast faint shadows across Winston's face. The AI voice remained clinical as it labeled each choice in floating text. Option 1, surrender to authorities. A probability meter flickered to life beside it, 12% timeline survival rate. The projection showed Winston in handcuffs, the Hirati dismantled in some government warehouse. Option 2, temporal jump to 2142. The display revealed a broken future cityscape, the meter stabilizing at 47%. Option 3, minimal interference protocol. Here the image showed Winston's barn exactly as before, probability climbing to 89%. The control console warmed under Winston's palms. 73 years of muscle memory told him this interface should resist unfamiliar hands, yet every surface yielded to his touch like old leather. Tiny markings along the edge spelled out maintenance instructions in his exact handwriting style, the same lazy cursive he'd used since high school shop class. 1 hologram, zoomed in on a university physics lab. Dr. Kathleen Phillips leaned over a workstation cluttered with papers bearing equations Winston recognized. He'd been mailing her anonymous notes for years, typed on an old Remington to disguise his hand. The display highlighted her coffee mug. The chipped blue rim matched the one sitting on his workbench at home. Temporal physics papers suggest dramatic interventions often backfire. Adjust one major event, 10 others spiral unpredictably. The ship's log showed hundreds of failed timeline repairs, each attempt compounding errors like a mechanic over tightening bolts until threads strip. Yet small, precise actions, a letter here, a tool left there, created stable loops. The difference between kicking a radio to fix static versus adjusting the tuning knob, one careful degree at a time. The AI displayed schematics for temporal drives. Not the Heratis, something cruder. Prototypes dated 30 years from now bearing Caldwell-Phillips co-patents. Probability matrices shifted as Winston studied them. Certain futures solidified while others faded like fog burning off at dawn. 78% of tested scenarios suggested minimal interference yielded viable timelines. The numbers matched his own intuition about repairs. Better to make 5 small adjustments than one drastic overhaul. Barn blueprints rotated in mid-air. Concealment protocols transformed the Herati into something resembling farm equipment. A thresher with too many gears. A grain silo with odd angular supports. The disguise held up to casual inspection because it wasn't fully fake. Buried components continued working. Temporal alignment drives masqueraded as eccentric power tools. Chronoton emitters passed for experimental weather sensors. Winston's finger hovered near the third option. The display responded by projecting flight paths, not into space but across county lines. Short hops timed for minimal visibility. The routes avoided major population centers in precise geometric patterns that matched crop circle formations. No dramatic exits. Just a ship pretending to be something ordinary men wouldn't look at twice. Military service leaves marks deeper than scars. Winston recognized strategic withdrawal versus defeat. The Herati wasn't built for revolution. Its systems whispered of patience, of century-spanning adjustments made teaspoon by teaspoon. Control yokes molded to his grip because someone had planned for this moment across generations. Not to change history in one explosive instant, to guide it gently back on course. Footage played of a younger Winston in a future workshop. He assembled devices matching the footlocker tools, while a silver-haired Eliza consulted schematics. The scene held odd familiarity, like watching home movies of events that hadn't happened yet. Technical manuals on the shelves bore titles blending engineering terms with temporal physics. One spine read Caldwell's Paradox Practical Applications. Probability matrices updated in real time. Winston's hand twitched toward the controls, sent certain future percentages climbing. The most stable timelines all shared one factor, him returning home unnoticed. Continuing his work quietly. Letting events unfold at their own pace, exactly as someone had calculated decades or centuries before. The cockpit displays darkened except for one symbol, the Caldwell family crest blended with a Mobius strip. It pulsed slowly above the navigation console like a heartbeat monitor. No explanation needed. Winston had doodled that same hybrid design on napkins for years without knowing why. Outside, wind tousled the wheat fields in perfect waves. Distant thunder rumbled at mathematically precise intervals, the ship manipulating local weather to mask its energy signatures. Even nature conspired in this plan. Every element aligned to suggest one truth. This wasn't about changing destiny. It was about recognizing the part he'd already been playing all along. Winston's fingers found the controls without looking. The Herati responded with a contented hum, not the roar of escaping spacecraft but the quiet settling of an old house, recognizing its owner's step on the stairs. Coordinates input themselves. Systems locked into standby patterns designed to avoid detection. The whole ship seemed to exhale as its master made the obvious choice. The only choice ever really available. Probability displays winked out. The cockpit lights dimmed to workshop levels. Somewhere beneath the floor panels, time itself coiled and settled like a watch spring, finding its proper tension. There would be no grand confrontation. No explosive revelations. Just an old mechanic returning to his bench with new purpose. Each small action rippling forward through years not yet lived. The most powerful repairs are often invisible. Done right, they look like nothing at all. The hologram flickered to life. A woman with Eliza's hazel eyes and Winston's square jawline. "Hello, great-grandfather." Her voice carried warmth and exhaustion in equal measure, the way soldiers sound after long deployments. She wore a flight suit stitched with unfamiliar insignia, but the faded coffee stain on the collar looked exactly like the one on Winston's shop apron. Her message played with measured pauses, each word carefully chosen. "I can't tell you what choices to make." A projection of the ship's logs appeared beside her, key sections redacted by pulsing black bars. Not censorship, but protection. Temporal communication protocols demanded constraints. Reveal too much and the paradox could unravel everything. The Caldwell-Phillips equation needs both of you working in parallel. Winston's hands trembled as equations scrolled across the display. He recognized the core framework, his own abandoned theories from the 70s but refined with notation matching Dr. Phillips's published work. Variables aligned with peculiar elegance, forming patterns that made his breath catch. Quantum entanglement research suggests particles linked across distance can share information instantly. This was that principle scaled up, mathematical proof that bloodlines could serve as living encryption keys across decades. The hologram pointed to a specific term in the equations. This variable represents your garage workshop in 1999. The footage that followed showed a younger Winston brazing something that sparked blue, an experiment he hadn't conducted yet. We use familiar spaces as temporal anchors. Studies of inherited memory show certain locations imprint across generations, not through mysticism, but quantum resonance in neural structures. The ship's AI had simply weaponized biology. Eliza's image flickered as the recording continued. Museum records show you spent 17 years perfecting the first chronal dampener. She gestured to schematics Winston had sketched last Tuesday, doodles he'd nearly thrown out. The designs appeared nearly identical, except for minor refinements suggesting decades of iteration. You'll know when to mail the next set of notes to Kathy. Navigation coordinates appeared alongside a building labeled Winston Caldwell Museum of Temporal Engineering, 2187 WOW. The architecture blended barnwood and futuristic alloys, his old workshop preserved behind glass. Visitors walked past displays of ordinary wrenches tagged as revolutionary devices. One exhibit showed his coffee-stained notebooks under climate-controlled seals. The hologram zoomed in on a guest log. Kathy Phillips's signature appeared beside an entry dated 5 years after her theoretical breakthrough. Not as a visitor, as curator. Winston's throat tightened seeing the date, 20 years beyond his natural lifespan. The display adjusted brightness to compensate for his aging eyes before he could squint. Your life matters exactly as lived. Eliza's voice softened. Historical records played, alternate timelines where Winston went public versus maintaining secrecy. The first scenario ended in government seizure. The second showed quiet progression toward breakthroughs hidden as farm repairs. Some foundations must remain unseen to bear weight. Quantum models flashed, demonstrating how subtle nudges create stable futures. A letter here, a tool left there. Winston's hands had been shaping history long before the ship arrived. The artifacts in his footlocker hadn't been placed by time travelers, they'd been planted by his own future self through carefully calculated causal loops. Remember the Stratocaster, the hologram showed. Winston's famous guitar restoration, the one musician still discussed decades later. Close-ups revealed temporal alloys woven into the fretboard at microscopic levels. His proudest work had unknowingly contained early chronal filaments. You've been preparing for this your whole life. The message ended with a family photo. 3 generations of Caldwells standing beside the Harati's sleek descendants. Winston's great-great-grandson held a tool nearly identical to the diagnostic. Winslow's polished shoes kicked up dust as he stormed into Winston's now empty barn. The government-issue Oxfords looked absurd against the oil-stained concrete, their gleam out of place among workbenches cluttered with carburetors and aging power tools. "Where is it?" he demanded, flashing a badge from an agency with no official designation. The laminated card meant nothing to a man who'd seen his own signature on patents dated 2143. Winston gestured to the tractor parts and rusted toolboxes surrounding them. A half-disassembled transmission sat on blocks. Wrenches hung in orderly rows above a bench littered with nuts and bolts. To Winslow's trained eye, used to spotting contraband in shipping crates and warehouse corners, nothing seemed amiss. But the diagnostic wand tucked behind the vise throbbed faintly with blue light when Winston's shadow passed over it. Effective concealment has always relied on the same principle. Extraordinary things disappear when made to look commonplace. Resistance fighters hid radios in bread loaves. Cold War spies smuggled microfilm in toothpaste tubes. Historians document how 92% of suppressed technologies evade notice through environmental blending. That twisted pile of scrap metal near the barn door contained alloys that wouldn't exist for 60 years. Winslow's radio crackled with updates from the perimeter team. They'd found no trace of the ship, no radiation signatures, no evidence beyond some oddly flattened grass. His fingers twitched toward the gun holstered at his hip, standard issue for retrieval ops involving classified assets. but you can't shoot what you can't identify. The phone rang on Winston's workbench, a rotary model older than Winslow himself. The caller ID displayed Dr. Kathy Phillips's university extension. Winslow's head snapped up at the name, recognizing it from classified watch lists. Winston lifted the receiver with grease-stained fingers, his smile widening as the physicist's excited voice crackled through the line. "What you mailed me, the equations, they're working." Kathy's words tumbled out in the rapid-fire pattern of scientific breakthrough. "The quantum entanglement matrices are stabilizing at 97% efficiency." "How did you know to adjust the—" Winslow lunged for the phone. Winston let him take it, watching as the administrator pressed the receiver to his ear just in time to hear the click of Kathy hanging up. The barn fell silent except for the buzzing of flies near an open can of motor oil. Declassified reports would later confirm the moment Winslow realized his failure. Not just to retrieve the asset, but to understand the nature of the game. True power doesn't manifest in raids and confiscations. It lives in the patient accumulation of small victories. A letter mailed here, a tool modified there. The bureaucracy Winslow represented was built to handle dramatic threats, not the quiet erosion of its foundations by a mechanic who knew how systems really worked. Winston picked up a socket wrench, testing its weight. The tool looked ordinary enough, though its alloy would baffle metallurgists. He'd spent 30 years fixing machines using parts nobody noticed. Why should this be any different? Outside agents swept the property with instruments growing increasingly erratic. Their Geiger counters registered normal background radiation, while simultaneously detecting impossible particles. The scanners couldn't decide whether the barn was perfectly ordinary or fundamentally alien, which Winston knew was exactly the point. Winslow's walkie-talkie burst to life with a junior agent's frustrated report. "Nothing in the fields. Sir, just soil samples and some old tire tracks." Static ate the rest. The administrator's shoulders sagged beneath his tailored suit. Standard procedure demanded he tear the place apart, but instinct warned that any thorough search might reveal truths his clearance couldn't handle. The shadows lengthened across the workbenches as afternoon waned. Tools cast odd silhouettes, some too angular, others pulsing faintly when unobserved. Winston wiped his hands on a rag, the motion casual, practiced. Every object in the barn now served two purposes, its apparent function and its real one. The coffee can full of nails held stabilized chronoton particles. The rust on certain components was actually temporal shielding. By the time Winslow ordered his team to pack up, even the flattened grass had begun springing back. Nature abhors a vacuum and a paradox. Winston's victory wasn't in hiding the ship, but in ensuring its presence became one more unprovable rumor in a world full of them. The phone rang again as the government vehicles pulled away. Kathy's voice carried new excitement. "Those calibration settings you suggested, they've increased power output by 300%. It's like the system was waiting for these exact adjustments." Winston hung up and walked to the barn's rear wall. His fingers found the hidden catch beneath a faded Johnny Cash poster. The concrete floor shuddered as the Harati's maintenance hatch irised open beneath his feet. Not vanished after all, just waiting. The AI's voice whispered through implanted nodes. "Chronal buffers at 100%. Ready when you are, architect." Above the workbench, a blueprint curled at the edges. The schematics showed an ordinary farmhouse basement, with reinforced concrete and room for upgrades. Winston picked up a pencil and made a small notation in the margin, the first of many adjustments to come. Some revolutions announced themselves with fanfare. Others arrive one careful measurement at a time. The setting sun painted the barn's interior in golden light. To any observer, it would have looked like any other mechanic's sanctuary. Just an old man puttering among his tools. Just another quiet evening in the countryside. Exactly as history required it to appear. Winston's pencil scratched across graph paper, his shaky handwriting laying out symbols that mirrored the ship's schematics perfectly. The phone cradle pressed between his shoulder and ear as Kathy Phillips's rapid-fire questions came through the line. Their conversation danced around classified terminology, using waveform collapse instead of temporal displacement, quantum entanglement persistence rather than time loops. Two brilliant minds communicating in theoretical smoke signals across the unsecured line. Kathy's breathing hitched when Winston described the alignment problem. His sketch showed a triple-loop Mobius configuration no physics journal had yet published. Static crackled as she set down her coffee cup too hard. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I derived that same structure last month. It's in a locked drawer." Studies show over 60% of major scientific discoveries emerge through parallel research, independent teams reaching identical conclusions. But this wasn't coincidence. The equations Winston drew matched Kathy's unpublished work down to the margin notes. The ship's AI monitored their exchange through Winston's neural implant. Probability matrices scrolled across his peripheral vision, adjusting percentages with each shared insight. Certain futures brightened while others dimmed to black. For the first time, the Caldwell-Phillips equation appeared complete in floating text between them, though neither had articulated all its terms yet. Kathy's pencil could be heard scribbling frantically on her end. Pages turned. A desk drawer slammed. She recited half-formed theories about quantum causality, each phrase dovetailing with Winston's next point. The rhythm mirrored old radio operators completing each other's transmissions. Historical archives document similar moments, when Bell and Watson, Turing and Church found themselves thinking with one mind across distance. Winston's arthritic fingers paused over his drawing. A particular variable nagged at him, the third-order temporal coefficient. Without prompting, Kathy gasped. "You're stuck on the Hermitian operator, aren't you?" Her chalk squeaked audibly as she solved it first. Winston's pencil moved to correct his draft before she finished explaining. Academic papers often credit single authors, but breakthroughs usually emerge from these duets. The ping-pong of ideas between kindred intellects. The AI adjusted its projections. A counter labeled timeline stability ticked upward from 47% to 63%. No alarms, no flashing lights. Just a silent acknowledgement that history had gently shifted course. Winston's workbench radio emitted a burst of static, likely government monitors scrambling the increasingly sensitive call. Kathy switched languages mid-sentence, flowing into French, then Hebrew when the interference worsened. Winston answered in kind, their dialogue weaving through 6 tongues like spies evading surveillance. Beneath the barn, the Heratis' chronoton drives pulsed in time with their conversation. Not powering up, not preparing to flee, simply resonating, the way a tuning fork vibrates when another strikes the same note. Crystalline circuits aligned to the rhythm of 2 human minds approaching synchrony. Quantum theory suggests entangled particles communicate instantly across any distance. The ship registered this collaboration similarly, an invisible thread pulling the future into focus. Kathy's voice dropped to a murmur. "They've been monitoring my mail since the Helsinki paper." Winston nodded, though she couldn't see it. He'd been on watch lists since '72. Paranoia came standard in their line of work. The ship's logs displayed declassified documents, decades of suppressed research into temporal mechanics. Every blacked-out paragraph represented someone who'd gotten too close to the truth. Winston rotated his coffee mug absently, its chipped blue rim matching Kathy's exactly. Research institutions classify holographic blueprints shimmered above the workbench, displaying Winston's workshop encased in glass nearly 2 centuries hence. Every grease smear on the pegboard remained perfectly preserved. The coffee stain on his favorite stool still darkened the wood, not replicated for historical accuracy, but left untouched since his last morning alive. Visitors would shuffle past displays of ordinary tools tagged with placards describing their revolutionary purposes. None would suspect the truth beneath their feet, the Herati resting in its underground chamber, waiting should time ever need repairing again. Eliza's recorded voice played softly through the projection. "Your life matters exactly as lived." The display split into branching timelines, one where Winston went public, resulting in government confiscation and halted progress. Another where he worked quietly, each small adjustment compounding across decades. Historical archives tend to sanitize revolutionary figures, spotlighting dramatic moments while erasing their daily grind. This future museum took the opposite approach. It enshrined the oil-stained notebooks, the half-finished tractor repairs, the mundane coveralls hanging on a hook as if their owner might return from lunch. Only 23% of preserved historical sites accurately capture their subjects' covert activities. This one built its authenticity around secrets kept. The hologram zoomed in on a guest log open beneath glass. Kathy Phillips's signature appeared beside an entry dated 5 years after her temporal mechanics breakthrough. Her fingerprints showed more ridge wear than in earlier records, the marks of a woman who'd spent years handling tools instead of just equations. She'd aged well. Her smile lines deeper, but her eyes alight with the same intensity Winston remembered from their late-night calls. The logs confirmed what the ship's projections had hinted. She'd survived the coming storms to become his legacy's keeper. Beneath the museum floor schematics showed something more startling, a basement laboratory sealed behind 6 layers of temporal shielding. The Harity rested there, not as a relic but as a contingency. Maintenance drones shaped like ordinary cleaning robots tended its systems at calibrated intervals. The display noted oddities future visitors would dismiss as folklore: tools moving overnight, faint blue lights in closed exhibits, just enough supernatural spice to distract from the mundane truth that the impossible sat inches beneath their shoes. The projection scrolled through visitor statistics. School groups, researchers, ordinary families on vacation, all walking through Winston's reconstructed life without realizing they stood atop the very machine that made their peaceful timeline possible. Security footage showed children pressing hands against the workshop glass, unaware their fingerprints aligned perfectly with marks left by a long-dead mechanic. The perfect hiding place, not concealed in shadow but spotlighted as history. Eliza reappeared, this time in a curator's suit rather than a flight uniform. She adjusted a display case containing Winston's famous Stratocaster restoration, the one local musician still mentioned decades later. Forensic scans would eventually reveal chronoton filaments woven into its fretboard at microscopic levels. His casual masterpiece had contained the first successful temporal alloy all along. Some foundations must remain unseen to bear weight, she said, echoing her earlier message. The hologram dissolved into blueprints of the university where Kathy worked. Different wing from her current lab. More secure, better funded. Floor plans showed her office positioned directly above a reinforced vault, storing documents in Winston's unmistakable hand. Notes she'd receive at specific intervals over the next 20 years. The Caldwell-Phillips equation existed now in halves scattered across time, waiting for their inevitable convergence. Winston's reflection glimmered in the darkened shop windows as the projection faded. Outside, the first raindrops of an approaching storm tapped against the barn roof. His tools hung where they always had. His coffee cooled in its chipped mug. Nothing appeared different to casual observation. Nothing needed to. The ship's AI pulsed once beneath the floor. Not an alert, but an acknowledgement. Tomorrow would bring more ordinary work, more careful nudges, more calculations whose full purpose wouldn't reveal itself for generations. Winston wiped down the workbench with an oil-stained rag, exactly as museum hollows would one day show him doing. Some revolutions announce themselves with fanfare, others simply echo through time, their origins growing more mysterious with each retelling until fact blurs with legend. He switched off the shop light, leaving the barn in darkness. Rain drummed steadily now, washing away tire tracks from government vehicles that would keep circling for weeks. Let them look. Let them theorize. The truth sat safe beneath 2 feet of soon-to-be-poured concrete, one more layer between history and what really shaped it. Upstairs in the farmhouse, a radio played soft static that almost resembled voices. Winston's chair creaked as he settled in with a fresh notebook. The first page bore today's date and a single sketched symbol, the Caldwell family crest entwined with a Mobius strip. Outside, thunder rumbled at mathematically precise intervals as the Haraty's residual systems adjusted local weather patterns. One small action among thousands that would eventually become someone else's museum exhibit. Someone else's mystery. Someone else's proof that ordinary lives often anchor extraordinary histories. Morning would find the notebook filled with equations not meant for anyone living. Not yet. Winston sipped his morning coffee surrounded by the familiar clutter of his workshop. The mug's chipped rim matched the one in Kathy's university office exactly. Same blue ceramic, same jagged edge where he'd dropped it years ago. Beneath the floorboards, the Haraty's AI hummed at a frequency only his bones could register, not communicating today, just acknowledging. Kathy's latest letter lay open next to his breakfast plate, equations spilling across graph paper in her cramped handwriting. The math converged with his own schematics in ways that made his pulse quicken, variables lining up like tumblers in a lock he hadn't known existed. Outside on the county road, cars passed at irregular intervals. Some slowed near his driveway, curious neighbors or government watchers he neither knew nor cared. The barn doors stood slightly ajar, revealing only shadows and dust motes where strange blue lights had once pulsed through the cracks. Normalcy had returned to the property, or at least the carefully constructed appearance of it. His workbench radio played the local weather report between bursts of static that might have been interference, or coded broadcasts the ship filtered before they reached his ear. Studies of master craftsmen show they report higher satisfaction from work with hidden significance. The Japanese concept of shokunin, pride in unseen excellence, echoes in traditional shipwrights who conceal messages inside hulls, or masons embedding secret symbols behind bricks. Winston oiled a wrench that didn't need maintenance, his hands moving automatically while his mind traced the implications of Kathy's last calculation. True contentment often arrives not in moments of recognition, but in knowing precisely where you fit within a larger design. The coffee had gone lukewarm when his retinal display activated, the AI projecting a countdown above the toaster. 27 days until Kathy's scheduled visit. No urgency to the numbers. No flashing warnings. Just a steady progress bar measuring mundane anticipation rather than impending crisis. Winston had marked the date already in his shop calendar between a dentist appointment and tractor servicing. Extraordinary events woven seamlessly into ordinary rhythms. His reflection shimmered in the polished surface of a torque wrench hanging nearby. The face looking back had more lines than last year, fewer than next. Hands that could once diagnose engine trouble by sound alone now required instruments to confirm what his ears missed. Aging happens in increments too small to notice until the cumulative effect becomes undeniable. Temporal mechanics operates on similar principles, small nudges compounding across decades until history shifts course without fanfare. The radio announcer mentioned Senator Walsh's latest campaign stop nearby. Winston's lips twitched. The politician had once confiscated his uncle's farmland through eminent domain. Future museum displays would note how that very senator's granddaughter later funded the Caldwell Temporal Institute without ever realizing the connection. Justice often works in slow, invisible arcs. Beneath the floor, the ship adjusted its chronal buffers with a subsonic thrum. No dramatic power surges now that its systems had stabilized. Just steady maintenance mimicking the house's natural settling sounds. Winston's boot tapped the concrete twice, their agreed-upon signal that all remained well. The answering vibration through his soles carried no data, only reassurance. An old mechanic and his machine keeping time together. Kathy's letter included a university grading schedule clipped to more equations. He recognized her shorthand, doodles in the margins marking concepts too sensitive to commit to plain language. One particular curve matched the Harati's toroidal drive chamber perfectly. She was getting close. Not that she'd ever visit the barn's hidden chamber. Winston's journal lay open on the kitchen table. Its pages a mix of grocery lists, tractor repair notes, and schematics that would one day rewrite physics. The ballpoint pen glided easily across the paper, too easily. He paused mid-calculation, examining the instrument. Matte black finish, precise 0.7mm tip, identical to the one clipped to Eliza's flight suit in the hologram. Not just the same model. The same scratches near the cap from being dropped on concrete floors. The ship's AI recognized his discovery before he verbalized it. A hologram bloomed above the table. Not young Lieutenant Caldwell this time, but an older woman with silver streaks through her auburn hair. She smiled at some private joke as her fingers tapped a console just out of frame. The pen in her hand bore the exact same wear pattern as Winston's. Objects in closed time loops often become their own causes. That pen had likely passed through generations of Caldwell hands, each adding new scratches while preserving the essential function. Winston resumed writing. His left page detailed carburetor adjustments for the John Deere. The right side plotted quantum entanglement matrices that wouldn't appear in academic journals for decades. The mundane and miraculous coexisted effortlessly now, flowing from the same pen with the same practiced ease. 84% of theoretical time loops require at least one physical artifact to anchor causality. For the Caldwell family, it appeared to be writing instruments. Oil stains from breakfast bacon dotted the journal's margins. Winston absently smeared one with his thumb while solving for temporal alignment variables, a domestic gesture that belied the equation's world-altering potential. The AI projected verification symbols alongside his work. Some matched perfectly. Others required adjustments even the advanced intelligence couldn't anticipate. The ship might contain future knowledge, but Winston's intuition about materials remained irreplaceable. His hands understood alloys in ways no computer could simulate. The holographic Eliza disappeared when Winston turned the page. In her place, schematics of something called a chronal bridge appeared, a smaller version of the Herati's drive core. The design bore hallmarks of his own style. Redundant safety systems, accessible maintenance points, that particular curved housing he favored for high-tension components. Dated signatures at the bottom showed his name alongside Kathy Phillips, though the handwriting clearly belonged to a younger version of himself. Beneath the floorboards, the ship's chronoton emissions spiked momentarily, not an alarm, more like a tool recognizing its master's hand. The vibration made Winston's coffee ripple ever so slightly, a phenomenon he noted without reacting to. Parallel development explained some coincidences, but the designs in this journal matched too precisely across too many idiosyncratic details. These weren't just inspired sketches. They were copied, or remembered. Winston paused to mark items needed for tomorrow's hardware store run. Galvanized nails, pipe fittings, 3 quarts of 10-30 oil. The list appeared ordinary enough, though certain items corresponded exactly to components in the projected schematics. Copper piping that could stabilize temporal conduits if cut to specific lengths. Electrical tape for insulating chronoton-sensitive connections. He'd been gathering materials for 2 repair jobs simultaneously, without consciously realizing it. The AI displayed manufacturing dates for each tool hanging in Winston's workshop, not when they were made, but when they'd be integrated into temporal devices. The crescent wrench above the workbench would help assemble the first prototype in 9 years. That particular screwdriver would calibrate a critical array in 2043. Every mundane object in his life served dual purposes across timelines, some already fulfilled, others yet to occur. Wind rattled the farmhouse windows. Outside, government sedans still patrolled the county roads, their headlights cutting through the gathering dark. None of the watchers noticed the faint blue pulse emanating from Winston's basement every 53 seconds, the exact interval needed to maintain local chronal stability. Let them stare at barns and tractors. The real work happened in plain sight, hidden within the rhythms of ordinary life. Winston's handwriting slanted as fatigue set in. The final journal entry detailed coolant flush procedures for diesel engines, standard maintenance by any measure. Yet the diagram showed a connection configuration identical to the Herati's secondary accumulator. Tomorrow's tractor repair would unconsciously reinforce techniques vital for future temporal engineering. Muscle memory compounding across lifetimes. As he closed the journal, the AI projected one last image, that same notebook behind museum glass centuries hence, its pages carefully preserved under filters that blocked harmful light. Visitor plaques would call it a historical curiosity, an old mechanic's eccentric blend of household accounts and science fiction doodles. No mention of how those doodles had saved the timeline dozens of times over. Some truths persist precisely because they're overlooked. The pen went back in the mason jar with assorted pencils and markers. Tomorrow it would note lumber measurements for a new shed, the same dimensions needed to conceal chronal stabilizer components. When Winston turned off the kitchen light, the after-image of equations lingered behind his eyelids like faint constellations. Every repair, no matter how small, echoed forward and back through time. Upstairs, his bed springs creaked their familiar song. The government cars made another slow pass down the county road, and beneath the house the ship maintained its silent vigil, not directing events but ensuring the right pieces stayed within reach of the right hands at the right moments. History wouldn't remember Winston Caldwell as the man who invented time travel, just the mechanic who kept reality running smoothly through attentive maintenance and the occasional well-timed repair. Dawn would find the journal exactly where he left it, ready for whatever ordinary, extraordinary tasks the day might bring. The pen would write shopping lists and equations with equal facility, bridging gaps between now and next and long ago. And so the loop continued quietly, persistently, one carefully recorded observation at a time. The timeline doesn't remember Winston Caldwell as a hero or rebel, just a mechanic who understood some repairs span generations. His legacy rests in oil-stained notebooks and tools preserved behind museum glass, their true purpose disguised as ordinary work. History rarely announces its turning points. Consider the garage where your grandfather kept rusty wrenches now gathering dust, the odd-shaped gadget in your basement toolbox, the broken appliance you've meant to fix for years. Winston's story asks, what extraordinary truth might be hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right hands to recognize it? More unsettling, what if those hands were always meant to be yours? The work continues quietly, whether we notice or not.